From pop culture to politics, this is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day, another great week, in fact, in this greatest nation on God's green earth. Is it a great time to look forward to a successful conclusion to the Iran war? That's what President Trump says. It has now been a full month of war. It was supposed to be over, remember, in 4 weeks now, or 6 weeks was sometimes put forward as the estimate, but that doesn't appear to be operative right now. The war in Iran has now passed the 30-day mark as the conflict escalates and pressure rises for Washington and Tehran to reach a ceasefire deal. Trump said days after the initial U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran that the operation would last 4 to 5 weeks, but could be shorter or longer. Proposals traded between the U.S. and Iran have not made any progress toward dialing down the conflict, and the war has shown signs of expanding in the last few days. The Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are some of the worst people in the world. I mean, really, really down there with Hamas and Hezbollah, other Iranian clients. The Houthis have jumped into the conflict Saturday as the group took credit for a missile attack on Israel, which said that the main projectile, was intercepted without any casualties caused. It came a day after the Houthis set out 3 red lines that, if crossed, would cause them to get involved. President Trump, meanwhile, said that the U.S. may blow up and completely obliterate, that's his word, it's a favorite word, Iran's electric plants and oil wells if a deal to end the war is not reached and the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Concerning those peace talks, Iran contradicted Trump's claims that Iran had already agreed to most of the U.S.'s 15-point list of demands to end the war, describing the entire 15-point proposal as unrealistic. The White House says it is making diplomatic progress toward ending the war in Iran, even as tensions appear to be rising. President Trump said that Tehran had agreed to most of the 15-point list of demands from the U.S. to end the conflict. Iran, meanwhile, is accusing Washington of secretly planning a ground invasion. It's not much of a secret amid ongoing talks. Iran has since threatened to rain fire on American troops as the Trump administration weighs putting boots on the ground. Trump has also raised the prospect of the U.S. taking Iran's oil in a Financial Times interview, and he added that he is still deciding whether to seize Karg Island, a key fuel hub which is critical to Tehran's economy. I believe Karg Island is about 15 miles only away from the mainland. Meanwhile, the Dispatch is reporting that U.S. Central Command announced on Saturday that more than 3,500 U.S. sailors and Marines aboard the USS Tripoli amphibious assault ship arrived in the Middle East. The next day, 2 U.S. military officials told the New York Times that several hundred U.S. Special Operations Forces, including Army Rangers and Navy SEALs, in other words, the best of the best, had also been deployed to the Middle East, bringing the total number of U.S. forces currently stationed in the region to more than 50,000. Do you think that most Americans are aware of that? Most Americans do not favor a ground invasion. There's a brand new poll It shows that when it comes to boots on the ground, 11% of Americans think that's a good idea. And over 70% of Americans, no. The officials added that the special forces have not yet been assigned a specific operation. Officials told the Washington Post that the Defense Department has been planning a potential ground operation in Iran for weeks, involving both infantry and special operators. Amazing. Meanwhile, President Trump has this to say on his statement on Truth Social. He says the United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime. In other words, there's already been regime change, says President Trump, despite the fact that the supreme leader of Iran is the son of the leader we killed, the son of Khamenei. And he says there's a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. Great progress has been made, but if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, says President Trump, and if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran. We will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalinization plants, which we have purposefully not yet touched, and touched is in quotes. This will be in retribution for our many soldiers and others that Iran has butchered and killed over the old regime's 47 reign of terror. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Meanwhile, there are more statements from President Trump. The birthright citizenship issue is coming up with the Supreme Court this week, and President Trump says this, again on Truth Social, birthright citizenship is not about rich people from China, he says, and the rest of the world who want their children and hundreds of thousands of more for pay to ridiculously become citizens of the United States. It is about the babies of slaves, and that's all in capital. We are the only country in the world that dignifies this subject with even discussion, which is simply not true. There are at least 30 others. Look at the dates of this long ago legislation. He says he's talking about the 14th Amendment to our Constitution. The exact end of the Civil War, exclamation point. The world is getting rich selling citizenships to our country, which at the same time laughing at how stupid, in capital letters, our U.S. court system has become. Tariffs, with an exclamation point. Dumb judges and justices will not a great country make. Now, do you think this is going to kind of mobilize the people that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court, who he now calls dumb judges and justices, because they're not voting for him reliably, and certainly not on this issue? The changing the United States Constitution and the way it's been understood, and the way it's been understood in courts for more than 100 years, since a case at the turn of the century, the last century, to try to change that substantive understanding seems to be unlikely. We'll be talking to an expert who says there's no plan B for Iran. Tom Nichols joining us coming up.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
And on the Michael Medved Show, we always get a great reaction when we welcome back to these airwaves Tom Nichols, who is a staff writer at The Atlantic and a contributor to the Atlantic Daily newsletter. His books include The Death of Expertise and Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. And just a reminder for people to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Michael Medved Official. Tom, you have a new piece in The Atlantic, which is brilliant as usual. But the headline is Trump had no plan B for Iran. What do you mean? The threat to blow up the saline conversion plants and the electrical grid and all of that? That threat isn't a plan?
Yeah, threatening to commit a lot of war crimes isn't really a backup plan. I think it's pretty clear that Trump went into this war kind of, as I say in the piece, kind of the way Putin went into Ukraine. He said, I'm going to hit these guys hard. The whole thing will collapse. The regime will be gone in a week. Then of course at the night that the war began, right? He's exhorting people, your moment is at hand. Rise up, take your government. None of that happened. And if anything, the Iranian regime seems to be consolidating itself. And as sometimes happens in these situations, that, when a bad regime is under attack, it actually finds ways to strengthen itself rather than to collapse. And when that happened, Trump was left with nowhere to go. He had been warned. We know from reports, for example, that General Kane warned him. Yeah.
See, pardon me, this is one of the very important pieces points you make in your piece, which is that don't blame the military for this, because they did their job. And you were talking about General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Go on. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, but you're right, Michael. And that is, and I think one of the things that people are having a hard time connecting here, how can the military operations be so amazing, be conducted with such precision and destructiveness, and yet it's not producing any strategic effects. And, when I taught all those years at the Naval War College, this was something we always tried to get across with historical case studies, that winning battles isn't the same thing as achieving your strategic goals. The Japanese did pretty well winning battle after battle right up until Midway, at which point, everything fell apart. The Germans did really well overrunning Western Europe, without working up a sweat in 1940 and 41. Until they went too far. The Americans won every battle in Vietnam. The U.S. military is fantastic at what it does, but those all have to be linked to some kind of strategic goal. And I think Trump just thought that if you inflict enough violence, everything falls apart, and then we get to pick the new government. And that's not what happened. And so now, I was going to say a moment ago, General Kane tried to warn him. Yes, they will close the Straits of Hormuz. Yes, they will attack their neighbors. And of course, Trump now says nobody could have predicted that. Well, everybody predicted that. I mean, anyone who's ever looked at this knew it was going to happen.
You predicted it, didn't you?
On the very night of the war, I said, this is going to expand pretty quickly, in part because and the first night of the war, and then when I wrote this piece weeks later, and today, as we sit here now, I still don't know what the ultimate objective of this war is. Secretary of State Rubio, today came out with 4 things. One of them was not nuclear weapons. What happened to that one? That was on the list up until a week ago. What happened to regime change? Trump keeps saying, oh, this wasn't about regime change, and then says we've got a new regime so we can deal with it. Well, that sounds like he was looking for a regime change. They keep changing their story and their objectives because they didn't really know why they were going into this other than for the greater glory of Donald Trump. I think he figured everything falls apart. They put up a statue in Tehran. Trump collects another, medal or prize from somebody.
They'll make a new prize, right?
Yeah, they'll make a new prize, and then he goes on to the next thing, which is clearly in his mind Cuba. But none of that's happening.
Okay, none of that is happening right now, but partially because he thinks we've already gotten regime change, because now we have Ayatollah Jr. We have the supreme leader is the son of the old supreme leader. Is there any basis at all for believing that this is a more benign and more pro-American, more reasonable regime?
Not with this guy. I mean, we've killed his father, killed most of his family,
his wife, and his sister too, I think.
I mean, there is no, there is no indication. I don't believe, you said a moment ago that Trump thinks that there's been regime change. I don't believe he actually thinks that. I think he realizes he has to say that because that paves the way for a climb down. Because then he can say, as he's been saying for weeks, we won. I mean, he said 2 weeks ago that we won. But I think saying that there's a new regime is a way that sets up kind of the framing that says, I can claim that we've won the war because I changed the regime. You didn't change the regime. You changed leaders, which is not the same thing as regime change.
We're talking to Tom Nichols, who taught for a quarter century, believe it or not, at the Naval War College, is an expert on national security. And I wish that he had been advising President Trump before this war. The new direction for the Trump regime appears to be threats that they have already agreed to most of the U.S.'s 15-point list of demands. Do you think that there are any of the 15 demands that they've actually agreed to?
No, and I'm not sure that they're even talking. I mean, Trump keeps saying they're negotiating and they're giving in and they're begging for talks. And there's no evidence that those talks are actually happening. If those were happening, the Pakistanis wouldn't have said yesterday, we're willing to host talks. Well, you can't be willing to host talks if they're already underway. So I think, again, this is just, the Trump administration saying, yeah, it's fine, we're winning. They're begging for, they're begging for a deal.
Okay, the other mystery you're going to explain to us, Tom, I hope, is why Pakistan? Why are we treating Pakistan as the perfect source to mediate this entire thing? Tom Nichols will be back in a few moments on The Medved Show.
Sign up today for our free weekly newsletter at michaelmedved.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to your 30-second laughing session brought to you by The Laughing Cow. Ready to laugh? In 3, 2, 1, and... Okay! Great job, everybody! Now unpeel a wedge of the Laughing Cow light spreadable cheese, a delicious snack with 2 grams of protein and 25 calories per wedge. Feels good to have a cow, huh?
And part of the big breaking news today is President Trump's new threat. He says the U.S. may blow up and completely obliterate, that's his phrase, Iran's electric plants and oil wells if a deal to end the war is not reached and the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Peace talks. President Trump does not have agreement from Iran, but he is going forward, apparently, he says, to finish a deal that he suggests is pending on the 15-point list of demands we've made to end the war. This is going to all be mediated by Pakistan. We're speaking to Tom Nichols, who has taught for 25 years at the Naval War College, is a profound expert for not only Atlantic Magazine, but as a national resource. Tom, why Pakistan?
Why not? I mean, I hate
Well,
to put it.
They're a dangerous Islamic country with a nuclear weapon.
The problem is that the Trump administration has blown open this giant hole in American diplomacy. Our allies don't want to have anything to do with us. They don't want to be involved in this. We haven't really counted on the idea that we'd have to talk to anybody after the first week of this war. And that opens the space for a lot of political entrepreneurs. I mean, I suspect, Pakistan stepped forward and said, yeah, sure, we'll take the lead here. That's good for us. It's, gives us that kind of visibility. And there's nobody in our completely dysfunctional national security or foreign policy establishment at this point to evaluate this or to think it through.
Well, President Trump says he knows the chief negotiator for Pakistan, who is Field Marshal Munir. And President Trump said, he's my favorite field marshal ever. And I'm thinking Field Marshal Montgomery during World War II.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he knows everybody. I mean, every time he talks about someone, you see this going back years, he says, great person. No, I'm very strongly, know him. And these are now kind of verbal tics that are part of his very limited, I would say, cognitive ability to process a lot of this. I think he probably has no idea who he's talking about, but as you say, he heard Field Marshal, and that sounds cool. But he's not going to listen to advice. Earlier you said you wished I'd been briefing him. I'm glad I wasn't. He doesn't listen. I mean, he doesn't take that kind of advice on board, even from somebody like General Kane. And I think what you're seeing now, Michael, is the effect that happens when you hollow out things like the National Security Council. The United States right now does not have a functioning National Security Council. And that group, I know folks always hear the name and probably, it's kind of murky what it does sometimes, but that's the president's personal kind of think tank run by the National Security Advisor, who, by the way, is not appointed by the Senate. The National Security Advisor is the president's personal guy for advising him on issues of national security. Well, we haven't had one. We've had Marco Rubio trying to do both jobs as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. The last guy who did that, by the way, was Henry Kissinger during Vietnam. So, take that for what you will, but it's a very bad idea not to have, an active and engaged State Department, a functioning National Security Council, a Defense Department. We really haven't talked about the Defense Department, but it's being run by a talk show host who is in way over his head and has no idea what he's doing. And that's just not a recipe for going to war against a country that's the size of, Italy, Spain, and Great Britain in terms of area, and 3 times the population of Iraq. I mean, this is, at some point, this just becomes crazy. So, when you ask why Pakistan, I have to throw my hands up and say, hey, sure, Pakistan. Why not Burundi? Why not, Uruguay? Because there's simply nobody driving this car because, as we said in the last segment, there is no plan B. He just doesn't know what he's doing at this point.
Okay, so what is a potential plan B, Tom? This is the one point that I wanted to make sure to get to, is that obviously the negotiation with Iran does not appear to be going anywhere. But Trump keeps saying we're close to an agreement, and they say we haven't even talked about an agreement.
He says that all the time. He says whenever there's an international difficulty, he says, we're getting there. We're having an agreement. It's going to be great. 2 weeks. Everything is, of course, in Trump world, everything is 2 weeks away.
Well, it worked in Venezuela would be his answer.
Well, yes, if you can do a quick snatch and grab and then leave the vice president of the country you just, ran into in charge. You weren't trying to defeat an entire nation, and you were basically just doing a kidnap job on, close to American borders. Very much an easier thing to do. So the problem for Trump now is all of his options stink. They're all terrible options.
Well, what about the option that some people have talked about, which is to distract any attention from Iran by going after Cuba, taking Cuba, as he puts it?
But it doesn't solve your problem in Iran. I mean, the Iranians would like nothing better than to have American attention divided between, spread out by 6,000 miles between Iran and Cuba. Because in the end, that still leaves Iran in control of the strait. It leaves the Iranian regime in place. It leaves, the Iranians and the Russians making money off of oil while Americans start paying more at the gas pump. That doesn't solve anything. The only scenario is a magical moment where somehow the Iranian regime collapses and a bunch of pro-American Iranians take over the government in Tehran. That's not going to happen. So the real question is, what is the worst outcome that we can live with? And I suspect that it's going to be that Trump declares victory, that the Iranians kind of, play pretend that, yes, the strait is open, but that in the end, actually, it leaves Iran militarily weaker, but politically in a pretty commanding place. That might be the best we're going to get out of this, because there are now reports, of course, that Trump is getting bored with all this, which literally the word, I think it was Axios, said, Trump is starting to get bored with the whole business, which is what he does, right? He kind of blunders into things. They don't go well. He gets bored with the whole business and he wants to move on to something else. I'm sure the Iranians would be more than happy to take that outcome.
Okay, so what's the biggest negative of that outcome in the moments left to us? What's the biggest damage to the U.S.?
It affirms that the Iranians are in charge of a big chunk of the world's energy production. I mean, it basically takes something that was a hypothetical. What if the Iranians just exercise complete control over the strait, and it turns it into a reality, and a reality that we all end up just having to live with. It means that the Iranian regime probably goes from thinking about a nuclear weapon and kind of playing this game of chicken with us, where we're going to enrich, but we're not going to enrich, but we're not going to build a bomb, to saying, I think that there are going to be people in that regime saying, the North Koreans had it right. Sprint to a bomb and you don't get knocked off.
So does this end America's claim to be the world's leading power?
I hope not, but but the president's done a lot of damage in a very short time, more than I ever would have guessed a president could do.
Tom Nichols, you can read his outstanding piece on Plan B regarding Iran and more at michaelmedved.com. Let's wish us all the best and a season of rebirth in this spring season. Tom Nichols, thank you, as always, for your wisdom. We will be right back on the Medved Show.
The greatest show on God's green earth.
The whole thing is a scam, and it's a shame, and it's a disgrace to our country.
The Michael Medved Show.
And on the Michael Medved Show, after talking for a while about the lack of a Plan B for the Iran war, there is also no Plan B right now for the economy of the United States. CNN is reporting U.S. job growth was already sluggish last year, though there were some early signs that the labor market might be finding its footing. But now the war in Iran has not only disrupted that momentum, but amplified uncertainty, threatening to push hiring further off course. A critical shipping route has been choked off, sending oil prices sharply higher, straining supply chains and driving up gas costs. Inflation and recession concerns are also rising, and with them, hesitation among employers. This comes after 2025 was one of the weakest years for the U.S. labor market in decades outside of recession years. The economy added just 116,000 jobs last year, according to the latest estimates. And that helps to explain a very big headline about the most recent poll. It's a big poll, very detailed, and a very large group of 1,000 respondents. This from the University of Massachusetts Amherst poll, which finds that President Trump's approval rating has fallen to 33%, the lowest rating of his second term in office. The poll of 1,000 respondents conducted March 20th to 25th, so just now, finds Trump's approval down by 11 points lower than a year ago, last April. In the midst of skyrocketing prices, significant declines in the stock market, an unpopular war in the Middle East, a government shutdown that has led to lines at airports and nationwide protests against his presidency, with an estimated 8 million people participating over the weekend. It is no shock that President Donald Trump's approval ratings have taken a hit in our latest polling, so said Tatisha Nateta, who is a provost professor of political science at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the director of the poll. There is more on that, but of course, President Trump believes that the saving of his popularity and the secret to winning this upcoming this November, just a few months from now, the midterm elections, the secret to winning all that will be the SAVE Act. Remember the SAVE Act? The SAVE stands for Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility. And Axios is reporting that more than 5 million voting-age American citizens, would have to drive an estimated hour or more to present their citizenship documents to register to vote, as would be required under the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility SAVE Act. President Trump is pushing the SAVE Act as necessary to secure future elections, but it could complicate voting for many American citizens. The SAVE Act would require people to present documents in person to an appropriate elections official to register to vote, effectively killing online and mail-in registration. More than 21 million voting-age Americans and American citizens, all of them, because non-citizens are not eligible to vote. It's a crime for a non-citizen to attempt to vote because it involves lying, basically. You're only allowed to vote in this country when you're a citizen, and there's very little evidence that there are non-citizens who are actually voting in anything like significant numbers. More than 21 million voting-age Americans, however, lack the documents needed to register to vote, even though they are legal citizens under the SAVE Act. Under the SAVE Act, you need a birth certificate or a passport, per an estimate from the Brennan Center for Justice, a policy nonprofit. What they found is the average American lives about 20 minutes by car from their nearest election office, according to an Axios analysis. Those are county or municipal offices that manage voter registration and voting. And for the record, quote, President Trump's Save America Act is common sense legislation supported by the vast majority of Americans, says the White House, including 90% who support voter ID, who want to ensure our elections are secure and that only American citizens vote in American elections. A White House spokeswoman, Abigail Jackson, said in a statement to Axios, "What's next? The SAVE Act is stuck in the Senate, but several Republican states are pushing similar measures covering their residents." And then this information from Brookings Institution, a leading think tank, which is not progressive or woke, but it is liberal. And they report that in the highly contested state of Pennsylvania, the swingiest of all swing states, heritage data goes back 30 years and covers 32 elections. This is from the Heritage Foundation, which is solidly conservative and advises the Trump administration. But they have data going back 30 years and covering 32 elections with over 100 million votes cast. And they found 39 cases of voter fraud. Okay, that's 39 out of 100 million. That's in Pennsylvania. Now, in Arizona, an even more dramatic story. The percentage of fraudulent votes in Arizona over the last 25 years of elections was a minuscule 0.0000, that's 4 zeros, 845%. And no election outcome in the U.S., no federal or state election over the last 25 years has been altered by ballot fraud. And then they'd say, well, what about all the ballot fraud in 2020? Wasn't that an election that was stolen? Well, no. If you actually look at 60 court cases and every examination of that election, so the entire story is supposed to be a proof that we need the SAVE Act because it will protect us from future repeats of Joe Biden winning the election. Joe Biden won that election by 7 million votes. He won by more than 4 times the margin that he lost by, 4 times the margin that he won by in 2024. And that is important to keep in mind. It is also important to keep in mind that the SAVE Act is very, very unlikely to pass. And meanwhile, the events over the weekend with the No Kings rallies, there were 77 people arrested in Los Angeles because they were misbehaving and they were violent. But most of the No Kings demonstrations, there are a lot of people dressed as the Statue of Liberty. CNN reported No Kings demonstrations swept the country over the weekend as crowds rallied against President Trump's policies, the rising cost of living, and the war with Iran. And thousands of protesters marched in major cities, including Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, and yes, Minneapolis, where Bruce Springsteen performed. More on the impact, if any, of these events in this greatest nation on God's green earth.